It is installation day for the UDM Pro. We have some pre-configuration still to do, but we're going to get it into the rack, and hopefully my network comes back up so I have internet access to work through next week. We're doing this on a Saturday. We're doing it on an iPhone. We're trying something new. Let's get to it. We left off in the last video with the UDM Pro having the drive configured, having it connected and adopted to my Ubiquiti account. Now it needs to be configured. Where we left off is we had this cable here that's connected back to the Ubiquiti switch on my network and allowing devices downstream to get DHCP. It's connected to the WAN interface, the internet interface on the UDM Pro. And you can see the internet icon there on the SFP module, and then it's also underneath on port 9 on the UDM Pro. What we're going to do though is I am going to plug my laptop into port 1. And what that'll allow me to do is hit the local interface of this device, log in with my UI account, and then configure the UDM Pro for the network that I have today. I'm taking this from a Juniper SRX 300 series firewall and introducing that same topology for the VLANs, sub interfaces, however the UDM Pro does it, because I'm still learning how this thing works. We will set that up, make sure it all works downstream. The things that are most important is that I have multiple SSIDs broadcasting off of my access points, so we'll have to make sure that it can talk back to the UDM Pro, get DHCP from that device, make sure the devices downstream are able to get out to the internet, all the things that are important for the network to function. So we're gonna do that, and then the other thing that I'm gonna do is, because this cable, and don't judge my wire management too harshly, it is awful under there. I really have to deal with that. But anyway, that patch panel, or excuse me, that keystone jack, those two keystone jacks go back into my network room, into my stack, and patch into a patch panel that then patches into the switch or firewall or everything else that I have back there. So what we're gonna do is take this cable and actually take the termination point back in the other room, and we're gonna plug that right into the Comcast box. That way we can mimic what it would be like when it's in my rack. I'm gonna take a direct handoff from Comcast as my ISP. This will have a public IP address provisioned to this port, and then downstream, hopefully, if I can get this to work right, all of the downstream connectivity for my LAN, my local area network, my local side, is going to have the same schemes that I've set up on the Juniper today. What that allows me to do then is I can take this device, remove the Juniper, plug this in, and in past videos you saw that I had SFP modules being used between the Juniper and the Ubiquiti switch. I'm going to reuse those instead for connecting LAN side connectivity on the UDM Pro. There is a LAN port 11 here that I can use for that purpose. So we're gonna do that, get it all cabled up, and then we're gonna test downstream. We're gonna make sure wireless is still up. We're gonna make sure that the local physical wired network is still up, and see what else I could do behind the scenes of the UDM Pro. We have to move over the network configuration and the protect configuration, so all the cameras and everything have to move over, and hopefully we don't have to go and reset and readopt some things, but we'll figure this out on the fly. So if we have to do some of that, that's no problem. We'll go through those processes as well. So stay tuned, like, subscribe, follow, all of the above to see more about the UDM Pro setup as we get this installed. Okay, so what I'm doing right now is taking the cable that currently goes into my docking station that's mounted up underneath my desk, taking that cable, I'm gonna plug it in over here to the LAN port 1 on the UDM, and we should see that link light up. We're starting to see data pass through. And then what I'll be able to do is we're gonna switch over to the computer. I should be able to hit the local interface of this. If you remember from past videos, you can hit the local interface of the UDM Pro, or like the UCK, or you can go in through the cloud. Either way, as long as it has internet access, it'll be accessible from anywhere. We're gonna hit the local interface, log in, and see how we can go through the process of setting it up for my local network, for the WAN, and then I'm gonna show you how I'm gonna go in the back and switch that cable out, plug that patch cable into the Comcast box, so now this keystone will be right directly into my ISP. All right, we are in my utility room, which also serves as my MDF, if you will. And we're going to take a look at the Ubiquiti switch to see what is patching in to the UDM Pro right now, so we can take that cable and move that to the back of the Comcast equipment. I'm going to show you what the rack looks like right now. So we have the switch, the Ubiquiti patch panel, the UCK today, and then this is the Juniper 300 series firewall that's going back on its WAN port into the Comcast box. So we're gonna need to swap that around here. One feature that is excellent about the Ubiquiti switch as well, even in the UDM Pro, they have augmented reality. So when I look at this, I can go across it really helps. There's not a lot of cases where I've walked into a network room and they have beautiful patch panel diagrams, one-to-one port relationships. It's never like that. I'm usually walking into spaghetti. This is a useful feature when you don't know what's plugged in downstream, you don't have a tester toner, you don't really have time to do any of that stuff. You have to figure this out quick. So I'm gonna do that. Unfortunately, I can't record as I'm doing that on the screen. I wish I could. I'd need a second iPhone here. I'm gonna do that, find out what it is, patch that in, and we're gonna go back to the computer. Okay, so we're back on the computer and we're gonna focus on getting connected locally to the UDM Pro. I wanna show something real quick with the configuration. When you plug in, I have my physical NIC card on my docking station plugged directly into the LAN interface of the UDM Pro. And this is the IP address that I'm getting via DHCP, and this is my gateway, 1.1. Out of the box, that seems to be the Ubiquiti default gateway. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna get logged into that. I'll bring that on over. And we will connect to the UDM Pro interface. I'm gonna go ahead and swing that back real quick while I get logged in so you don't see any of my stuff. So I don't want you looking at my credentials. All right, so we are logged in now to the UDM Pro. And I can see very similar layout to the UCK. Very similar. Has the network and protect applications that come pre-installed. We updated the firmware. We have the daily updates, auto updates set up. We can look at all of these other applications, and I probably will in later videos. We have an Access implementation out there for one of our clients, but it's not something I'm buying the kit for anytime soon. But we want to go into the network and we want to see how we can go about setting up the UDM Pro. As we look at the UDM Pro, we can see the WAN IP port, port 9. That's where I mentioned it's plugged into my current switch, getting DHCP from my local switched network. And that is double NATing, or taking this private IP address and then going out over the Comcast internet that I am using. So my device, the laptop I'm on right now, is connected to the Ubiquiti's 192.168.1 network. And then it is NATing, or translating, to 10.0.19.164, which is a DHCP provided address on my wired network. And then that address is NATing out again to the private IP address provided by Comcast. And you can see different things that are going on here as far as what's happening upstream, what type of your internet health. You can run a speed test on here and see what kind of speeds I'm getting. As I've said in a previous video, I'm not getting very fast internet speeds. It's okay. So what we want to look at is how we can go ahead and configure the ports on the UDM Pro and look at what options we have to set the WAN port, configure the network, go through all of that. So when we look at internet, we have port 9 and 10 on the UDM Pro that we can configure. So if I want to, I can go in here and set a static IP address. Let me actually get familiar with this first. So internet, port 9, networks. So how do I change? So as we go into the settings, we see very similarly to what we saw with the UCK. We have the Wi-Fi, which will get set up when I adopt access points into this system, when I move those over from the UCK. I have the networks where I can configure different VLANs. I can configure those settings, their primary internet, and then the internet tab. So I have the 2 ports available for WAN connectivity. I have an SFP port, which is port 10, designated again by that blue globe icon, the universal internet icon, as they present it in Ubiquiti. And the Ethernet, the RJ45 NIC for port 9, which is what my current cable is plugged into that patches back to my Ubiquiti switch. So what we could do is we see that it's set to auto, and it's doing an estimation of anticipated speeds. What we want to do here is we want to set this to manual. We want to go down right here to this IPv4 configuration. So I have a /29 block that provides me 5 available IP addresses. It's technically 6 usables within that. We have 1 network and 1 broadcast address in a block that cannot be used or assigned to a node. However, there are 6 available IP addresses within that /29 block. And what I can do is 1 is going to be used for the gateway for Comcast's device, so we can talk across that network. The remaining 5 can be provisioned to devices downstream, such as firewalls. In this case, we have it provisioned to my Juniper SRX. So I'm going to take a public IP address from that block, and I'm going to assign it to this port. And when I do that, I will now have to go back into the other room and move the cabling around so that that port patches into the Comcast device directly, and we'll come back to this screen and confirm that we have internet access over the public IP. This will remove the double NAT situation and have the UDM Pro going direct out to the internet. And that's fine because this is also a firewall. There are security components, so we're not wide open to the internet if we connect this directly to the public IP and talk out to the public internet. There are protections, there's services on here that are going to prevent the world from coming into my network when I set up everything downstream from the UDM Pro. And we'll go through that in more detail as I learn along with you what the capacity is of the UDM Pro. Okay, so we have the port provisioned. We have the static IP address assigned. We have the gateway of the ISP assigned. Now it's time to go switch some cables because, as you can see on the previous page, we don't have any internet connectivity right now. It doesn't know anything about that network because physically it's plugged into my switch in the back. So we have to get that connected to Comcast. I'm going to go do that now, and we'll see what we get. One thing I want to mention before we start going into the nitty-gritty of this is a primer for a networking series that I'm working on. But as you start to think about how you're putting this together in your home network, if you're doing it as a hobbyist or if you want to build a Ubiquiti system at your home network, whatever the case may be, start thinking about your configurations. And the way I try to approach that, and I'll have more write-ups and documentation, things that I'd like to share with the audience to help think about those processes. But the way I approach a network design is I start from the edge in, and the most edge device, the top of that list is the ISP equipment. So how are you getting your internet and how is that being provisioned? In businesses, oftentimes they get a block of public IP addresses dedicated to them so they stay consistent or static as it's referred. Most residential systems are being provided a dynamic public IP address that has the ability to change over time. Those leases, they end and then they renew, and then new IP addresses are assigned to your ISP equipment, and then any devices you have connected downstream are going out a different public IP address. Maybe that doesn't matter to you. In some cases it may not, but in either way, edge devices like firewalls support DHCP on WAN ports. That's not a problem. The thing it gets a little tricky with is trying to do NAT and other technologies that we'll dive deeper into in the network series, but again, I'm getting ahead of myself. Think about what your network scheme is going to be. What is your internet? What do you want to have as your edge device? Is it going to be the UDM? Is it going to be another type of firewall? And then downstream, what do you want your private IP addressing to be? And there's classes and all kinds of considerations and how big you want to make your subnet. We can go on and on. Just start thinking about that because it's a big important piece, and without that information, it's going to be tough to put the puzzle pieces together for the configuration of the UDM Pro and downstream network. Just start thinking about it. If you have questions, ask. And hopefully I can get some networking 101 material out to help fill in those gaps if this isn't an area that you have a keen sense for, or if you don't have experience as you're building your home network and trying to do this stuff. Hopefully that will help. But I digress. Let's move on to configuring the ports, moving the cables, and seeing if we can get internet access. Okay, so we found that port 9 here is patching into this patch panel keystone. And this cable is going into the back of this Comcast box, which has 4 ports available to connect devices into. So we're gonna patch that in, and hopefully, when we get back to the computer, that connection will provide internet access to the WAN port of the UDM. This is going up through my wall, back to that keystone jack under my desk. Now we should have internet. Let's see what happens. All right, so we just finished patching everything in the back, and actually, as I was recording that notice, I got an indication from the Ubiquiti app that network connectivity has been restored to the UDM Pro. What we can see on the screen here is now we have the primary WAN set up over the public IP address. If I go back to my dashboard, I can see that I have internet connectivity, I have uptime, I have traffic passing. Then what I'd like to do, just as a test, is go ahead and open up Command Prompt, and I'll do a ping out to Google. We'll see that we have ping results. Just make sure it's resolving properly. Perfect. We have internet. We have internet. The next step is going to be extracting all of the data and devices from the UCK and moving that over or importing that into the UDM Pro. I'm going to review a few articles because I haven't done this process at all, and I would very much like to avoid having to reset all my access points, my other switches downstream, all of the cameras I have at the house. That would be a bit of a nightmare. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some time to go through some documentation, and I'll show you what I find, and we'll go through step by step what needs to happen in order to properly convert from the UCK to the UDM Pro and make sure all of those devices come back up. All right, let's get to it. All right, now we're ready to back up the Ubiquiti Cloud Key information so we can get that over and imported into the UDM Pro. This is prior to us needing to disconnect the UCK from the network so that we can import that data and not have any conflicts with the devices. Since the UDM is a controller and the UCK is a controller, we don't need them on at the same time. We can't have them on the same network at the same time. To do that, what we've done is we've logged in to the Ubiquiti portal through the Unify console. Again, you can do this through the local UI, but we just did this through the website. And you will do a backup now. Now, I've already gone through this process, but to click this will initiate a cloud backup and will also download a file for you so that you can download it to your local device and use that for import into the UDM. As an added step, if you feel it necessary, just to be safe, and since a lot of us that are using these, and myself included, are doing a lot of configuration elements and there's a lot of nuance to it and we don't want to lose or have to recreate all that, you can do backups from the network application as well. So you'll go into backups and you'll hit download, and the same is true for the camera system, where you can go into the protect application system and then download the migration file, and that downloads in a zip format. From here, we're going to disconnect all of the equipment. So I'm disconnecting my Juniper because the switch is currently patched into that. We won't need that any longer since now the UDM is patched into the switch, and that'll allow for the connection to the UDM as the gateway. We don't need the UCK plugged in anymore, so we'll go ahead and get those unplugged from the network. With both of those unplugged and the UDM Pro still connected to this laptop via a physical link, we're going to access the UDM Pro interface, access the the import process, and go ahead and import all of those files that we exported from the UCK. Now keep in mind again, regardless of if I have internet up or not, the WAN port is now configured for a public IP address on my home block. So that device is connected to the internet, regardless of if I shut down my Juniper, shut down the UCK, that doesn't matter. The UDM is now acting as its own edge for its own private network downstream, which is that 192.168.1 network by default. After the import, it will have imported all of the networks that I created and all of the VLAN configurations, all of the cameras, the access points, the switches, everything associated with the network application and the protect application. All of that should be imported into the UDM. I should not have to reset anything with hope, and I should be able to then allow this UDM device to manage my network and serve as the edge appliance. What I'll do from there is rack and stack it. At a future date, I'll get that into the rack, but right now I'm gonna run it on my table to the right of my desk so that I can monitor the experience and learn a little bit more about what the UDM Pro can do on the network, from IDS, IPS to intrusion detection, intrusion prevention. It has VPN features. It has a whole swath of other things that aren't available or different from the Juniper SRX. Juniper SRX is a wonderful firewall. I love Juniper. I always tout that they're a really good product, but this is going to allow me to have an entirely Ubiquiti network. So I'm doing a lot of talking. Let me get to the fun stuff, which is disconnecting all of that equipment and importing all of the settings from the UCK to the UDM Pro. And with a little hope and a little luck, this is the first time I'm doing this. Hopefully we won't have to recreate everything in the new UDM Pro. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, we're back in the MDF where we're going to disconnect the Juniper SRX 300 firewall and the UCK. The Juniper is connected using multi-mode fiber with transceivers. So all I need to do here is just disconnect this. The link lights will go off. I'll pull that transceiver out. We're going to use that transceiver to connect this switch to the UDM Pro on the SFP LAN port when we move the UDM into this rack. So that will be the trunk link that connects to the UDM Pro as the edge. The Ubiquiti Cloud Key is powered via PoE, and because we have the rack mount kit, it's powered in the front. So all I have to do is pull that out. That pulls power to the the UCK. So now the UCK is offline. It is no longer acting as the controller for the network, for the Ubiquiti network. While this is still on, the SRX is still on and connected to the WAN, it is not patched into the switch. We have the UDM Pro patched into the internet here, and then we also have in the patch panel the other keystone under my desk patching into the switch that's going into the LAN port of the UDM Pro. So it'll allow the wired network to communicate. When we restore all of those configurations, it should see everything that the switch is connected to and pull all of that in. Cameras, the switches that I have here upstairs, the access points that I have here and upstairs, without us having to do any resets or re-imports or readoptions of that equipment. Here's hoping. Let's go back to the computer and see what we get. We just finished disconnecting everything from the network. That included the SRX 300, that included the UCK. No longer online, no longer servicing as the edge in the form of the SRX firewall, and the controller in the UCK. We can see on the screen here that the UCK over the unify.ui.com, the Unify management portal, is no longer available. That device is now offline. The UDM Pro is still available because, again, we provisioned its own IP address separate from the Juniper, so it's not doing that double NAT that it was doing before when we initially set it up. It's out on the internet. We are going to restore the backup file that we took from the UCK to the UDM, and we're going to see what happens. So all we need to do there is go into console settings. So when you click in, you may by default be brought into the network application. You'll click OS settings, console settings, then underneath system config backup, you will click restore. So now we're going to restore backup, and we are going to upload a backup file. We're going to search for that on the desktop, and we're going to find the backup file. This is the network backup, aptly named network. This is the Unify OS backup. We're going to select the Unify OS backup and click open. We're going to see that it opens. We're going to make sure everything looks good. Restore all applications and settings. I'm going to go ahead and click restore. We're going to wait for this process to complete, and what should be accomplished through this process is it's backing up and it's importing all of the settings that were applied on the UCK. The administrators, it is applying the network configuration, it should be importing the devices, cameras, camera settings, all of the above should be imported through this process. So we'll take a few minutes to let this go through, and then we'll see what we get on the other end. As we're continuing through this process, it just completed the console settings. It is doing the network, and now it is doing the protect. I would infer that if you have other applications on the UCK, for example, you have identity or access or whatever they may be, they will also be backed up as part of this and then re-imported when you move over to the UDM. So if you have more than what I have in my case, where it's just network devices and cameras, you'll be able to restore all of that. I wouldn't doubt that that's going to be part of the restore process, but we'll continue to let this finish and we'll see what we get once everything is fully imported. It's getting very close. I'm excited. Hopefully everything comes back without issue. You may notice I look different than I did in the video. It's because during the editing process, you identify things that you missed during the initial recording. As I was recording this, one thing to keep in mind, the video you're about to see, the section of the video that you're about to see, is me identifying devices coming back online. The reason the cameras came back online is because they were getting DHCP. They are not statically assigned. One thing to consider when you're setting this up is when you do the import, it's going to keep the default network, that 192.168.1 network. If you want it to pick up all of the devices that were on your previous network, you're going to need to configure that new network scheme, or rather the old network scheme, on the UDM Pro beforehand, and then everything will light up. I navigate a little bit through that issue in the video, but wanted to call that out because that's important. Those devices don't automatically come back up. And the reason I got excited with the cameras, I wasn't paying attention to the fact that they were getting 192.168.1 addresses, realizing that's not the network that I want them to be on for my production setup. So just keep that in mind when you're setting this up and doing the conversion. The networks do not come over one-to-one. You're going to need to configure that default network to whatever your IP scheme was previously on your UCK so that it carries over. All right, so now we're starting to see devices come in as we finish the import. I'm seeing all of these devices start to go green. That is, again, because the UDM is patched in through the keystone under my desk back to the switch. It goes into the patch panel and then it patches into the switch. So it is identifying all of these devices and then pulling them back into the system. I'm hopeful that it's going to complete all of the rest. However, it's got to go through that process. The two Wi-Fi units may not come online. The two Wi-Fi cameras may not come online until the access points are obviously back up and they're broadcasting again. So right now they're getting readopted into the portal, and it may take some time for those G4 cameras, those instant cameras, to come back online. So we'll wait here a few more minutes and see what comes online. Hopefully everything comes back up and we'll be able to continue working just like we were on the UCK, but now off of the UDM Pro. I'll show you what I had to do in order to get the network back online. So we had to go into the network, rather get all of the switches and APs back online. So we'll see here, because of the restore, it actually labeled this the UDM Pro, it actually labeled it the UCK. So we can change that quickly in the console settings. Just update that to UDM Pro. Again, it's taking the backup from the UCK and it's gonna pull those naming conventions over, no big deal there. But what we'll do is we'll go into networks, we'll go into settings, we'll go into networks down here, excuse me, we'll actually go into, we'll go into networks, okay. We'll go into networks and then it's gonna set the primary WAN. We'll set that to default, and then we're not gonna auto scale the network. We're gonna switch that to the 10.0.19.1. That's gonna be the gateway IP, and then it's gonna generate DHCP for 254 usable hosts underneath, which is a /24 subnet mask, that 255.255.255. This is going to be the new scheme of the network. And we can limit that, and we can set, scale that back if we want to only specific IP addresses. I kind of wish it doesn't look like, oh, there we go. Okay. I was gonna say, I typically like to do 100 to 200 because you really don't need that many addresses. So we'll set that up, have 100 to 200 addresses available. We'll go ahead and not contained in the provided IP subnet. Well, how so? Is that because I changed this? It probably is. So if I go back to a /24, now I'm good here. So if I do 100 and 200, I don't have a conflict. We're troubleshooting in real time, folks. All right, I'm going to go ahead and apply that change, and then I bet you it's gonna drop my connectivity as soon as that updates. I'm gonna have to do an IP config release renew, which just resets DHCP in my addresses. And then these devices should come back up. So let me go ahead and try that now. Yep, so network is offline. So all I have to do is go into command prompt, and I'll do an IP config /release, and then nnipconfig/renew, so I do it all at once. And then it'll come back up with my new IP address on the 10.0.19 network. There we go. 129 is the address provided by the UDM Pro. All of those are back up, and look at that. All of my network devices are back online. So now what I get to do is go run over to the patch panel and start unplugging. Oh, it looks like some of the devices are trying to connect and get DHCP. Let's see if the rest of them do. Maybe. I'm so hopeful that I wouldn't have to go and unplug some stuff. But I'm gonna go do that anyway. Let me go do that, and then we'll come back to the screen and see all of those come back online. All right. This is why I love doing this live, because you can see in real time my gears turning in the troubleshooting process. As I was sitting there waiting, some of the devices came back up. The ones that were over wireless came back up. The G4 instance, and you can see the setup videos for those types of cameras in a previous video. One thing I didn't think about, when you have a switch and you have a managed switch in the network, you can control the port. So Ubiquiti provides us the ability to see what's connected to the port versus some switches you might have protocols like LDP where you can see neighboring devices that are connected and what port they're connected to. Ubiquiti gives you an interface, and with Ubiquiti devices, it will show you what's connected. So all I have to do here is, if I want to reset, and I'll just triple check that they're not just slowly trickling in and I'm being impatient. I am. They are slowly trickling in. But if they did not, all I would really need to do there is go onto the switch and power cycle, because they're PoE powered devices. All I would need to do is go into the switch and power cycle those devices. And then as soon as they came back online, they'd start calling out, hey, give me an IP address. And the UDM Pro would then respond with the new range for the default LAN that we just set up. Now we can get fancier with it, which I plan to, which is going to be putting those camera systems on a separate VLAN. Now that it's all Ubiquiti, we can get real creative with how we split those up, so I can have cameras on their separate security VLAN or IoT VLAN or whatever I want to do. But for the purpose of getting them back online, I can just flip the switch port on and off. That's awesome. This is why I love technology. This stuff is so much fun. And when you start seeing the little things that you can do, you can start applying it. And if you do this as a hobby, it's fun, and you just dive right into it. If you do this work, like for me, you just fall in love all over again. Like, oh, I didn't even think I could do that. I was sitting there running back to the patch panel to start unplugging stuff. And I'm like, wait a second, I can do this right through the interface. How awesome is that? I don't have to worry about physically engaging anything. And how useful is that in a situation where you're actually in a network environment, you're in a production environment, you don't have to run back to the switch. You don't have to go back and physically, no, I'm just gonna sit in the switch interface, I'm gonna bounce that cable, I'm gonna bounce that cable, I'm gonna bounce that port, and recycle the device, and the device will get DHCP. Love it, I love networking, it's a lot of fun. Okay, so we'll go in and we see all of these devices starting to come back online. When they come back online, they're fully registered in the UDM Pro. They will begin recording to the Protect application, same as before. So we can see all kinds of stuff now showing up in the Protect application. We can see how many cameras we have connected. All of that came back. Now, this, I don't believe, retains recordings, but I'm not going to dive into my recordings because I don't want you to see my stuff. But my understanding is the process does not allow for recordings to be retained, even though it's showing some on there. So I'll do a little testing on the side and throw a snippet in the corner of this video if that's the case. But my understanding is you don't get any of that recording retention. It just brings over all of the settings, cameras, and then all of the stuff that you had previously set up inside of the Protect app. All right. I think our next step for here is to get this device racked, but I'm going to leave it on my desk for a little while just to make sure that it's working, that there's no issues I have to deal with. It's all configured. It's configured just the way it would be when I move it into the rack, but then we'll introduce, so I'll do a very brief rack video where it's introducing how to stage that in the rack, how I want to move my patch paneling around and everything, get it all nice and neat so that it's a patch panel into the switch with the UDM Pro in there, and how I typically like to orient my network or my network rack, and get that fiber transceiver connected from the switch to the UDM make sure that that's trunked properly, make sure that that's working across the board. And then we'll do a little bit of testing on the wireless to make sure the trunks and everything like that are working okay, and all of those devices are able to connect back to the UDM Pro. There's a lot in this video. I hope this was helpful. This was a lot of fun for me. I enjoyed this whole process. I wasn't sure what to expect, nor how it was going to go, and if I was going to have to reset everything in my home network. Fortunately for me, the family's out of the house today, so I get free reign of doing a maintenance window. So yes, when you have a family, you also have to schedule maintenance windows, and this is one of those days, so I get to do that. But I hope this was useful. I hope this showed in real time what you can run into and what it looks like to think through troubleshooting in real time, and find out and remember options that you may have that you didn't think you did. So you're running back and forth between a room like, oh no, my internet's down, now I gotta plug this in, I gotta do this. There's a lot going on here and a lot to consider. So I hope this was helpful. I appreciate any feedback on the video, on the content, on the way it's presented. If there's anything else you'd like to see, as always, please make note of that in a comment. Like, follow, subscribe, share if you find this useful. And hopefully if you're installing one of these, I helped a little bit. The next step is possibly getting a second one and figuring out their shadow configuration, which is a high availability configuration for the UDM Pros. However, I do have a small 8-port PoE switch that I'm very excited to show you how to connect the switch, configure it, trunk it, do all of those things. And I think that'll be a nice conclusion to the overall Ubiquiti ecosystem videos. And as things change and update, I'll make sure to add that stuff in there. However, this is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to do some networking 101. We're going to do some other videos. I'm rambling. We'll get to it. Like, follow, subscribe. You'll see all the updates for the next video series that comes out. And thanks for following along this journey. Now that we have the full Ubiquiti network stack, we're gonna have some fun with it. We'll make some content and we'll get some training out there, and hopefully it'll be educational. All right, thanks y'all. We'll see you on the next one.